Bring the conjurer to her justice.
Please! Please! Please!
If the woman be a witch, then throw her into the lake. If she be a witch, she will swim, and it is not within her own power to prevent.
She's a witch! She's a witch! She made my apples go rotten! She killed my husband! Kill
Witches were perceived to be nasty, harmful, bitter, envious people. People who had it in for you personally, people whose sole existence was to make life unpleasant for their fellow neighbours and villagers.
In many ways, the cunning woman and the witch are opposed personalities, although in the 20th century they've become mixed together. A cunning woman is an expert in magic used to help people, although admittedly often for a fee. And the main item of business for a cunning woman is breaking the spells presumed to have been put by witches.
People in the early 17th century and the 1600s would have very mixed feelings towards the wise women in their village. On the one hand, they would feel enormously grateful if they were cured of an illness. And it was those women who ran the risk, if they did cure someone, they could be accused of practicing magic. And if they didn't cure someone and the person died, then they could also be accused of practicing magic. So they were in a very vulnerable situation.
At the opening of the 17th century, the King of both Scotland and England was King James VI of Scotland and First of England, who is the only monarch of Great Britain who has made his name as a witch hunter.
James I was absolutely paranoid about the subject of witches. He believed that witches not only existed, he believed they were actually out to get him. He was even convinced that witches tried to stop his wife, Anne of Denmark, trying to get to Scotland by cursing the vessel she was on. He was always looking over his shoulder, and he was determined to rid the whole country of witchcraft.
There was generally a feeling of unrest. There was a new king who'd arrived from Scotland, but I think in Lancashire that situation was particularly exacerbated because it was a very poor part of the country and it was very isolated, and you got a lot of these scattered communities who were very separated from what was happening elsewhere in the country.
The two main families associated with witchcraft from the Pendle region would be the Demdike family and indeed the Chattox family.
So in the Device family, Elizabeth Southerns, who was also known as Demdike, was the head of the household, and her daughter Elizabeth Device had 3 children, Alison, James and Janet. To the villagers, Demdike was a confirmed cunning woman, but in fact the family were beggars and would often go out in search of charitable passers-by.
I suppose really the whole story starts on the 18th of March 1612 when Alison Device left her home, Malkintower. She had a walk along the coned Trawden Road, which is just beneath the shadow of Pendle Hill. There she had the misfortune, and it was misfortune, of meeting a Halifax peddler called John Law.
Spare me some pins, sir. Oh, please, sir, just a few pins, sir.
I'll not be loosening my pack for the likes of you.
But I haven't eaten in days.
Be on your way, girl.
Curse you.
John Law's left arm, his left leg, left hand side of his face were completely paralysed. Alison was convinced that she had indeed cursed him.
She shouted after him, and then he fell down and had what appears to have been a stroke.
The kind people of the town of Colne in North Pendle, they could see him. They got a stretcher party together, they carried him down the slopes of Pendle Hill and into an old alehouse called the Greyhound Inn.
It's a bad business, John. It is likely this girl will remove you from your trades.
Is this her? Is this the device girl that you spoke of, Father?
Make an effort, John. For this offender to escape justice would be of no use. The crime against you is deplorable, especially if we be speaking witchcraft.
Surely you do not doubt it. The people of Pendle have dealt with your lot for a long time. That grandmother of yours has half the folk struck with fear.
Sirs, I never meant no harm by it. I pray you will mend soon, I do.
So you confess? You confess to the laming of this man?
'Twas me, sir, but I never meant to. I only meant for some pins, sir.
This is a man of grand stature. Yet you, by your devilish art, have lamed him.
I pray you forgive me, sir. I don't want the devil in me. I pray for you, sir. I beg you, forgive me.
Save your petty stories for the magistrate.
I forgive.
John?
I forgive you, device. You're free to leave.
But Father, this beggar! Look what she's done to you!
There is no case for the rope. If this be your father's wishes, indeed, that'd be an end of it.
This woman has laid upon my father a wickedness that has left him shuddered. Where is the justice?
I have forgiven her. There's no need for further talk. You may leave.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Bless you.
The tragedy of the Pendle trials unfolds when the stroke-stricken peddler is taken to his house, and he just wants to leave it there, at least as far as the child is concerned. But it's his son Abraham who becomes convinced his father is bewitched, and it's he who carries the accusation to the local JP, Roger Nowell, and that's when everything hits the fan.
He made his way to Reed Hall, not too far from Colne, the home of the local magistrate, a gentleman called Roger Nowell.
Magistrates are crucial figures in the witch trials in the sense that they're the ones who deal with a complaint in the first instance. What would happen was that someone suspects very strongly that they have been bewitched. They've identified who the witch is, and so they would then report it to the local magistrate or justice of the peace.
Alison was immediately arrested. Young Alison, of course, had admitted to laming the peddler, John Law, but she had no idea this was a state capital offence.
Roger Nowell interviewed Alison Device, who confessed to bewitching the peddler and sought his forgiveness, and also accused her neighbour Anne Whittle, who was also known as Chattox, of bewitching and killing 4 people and making clay figures. Chattox went on to tell stories of temptation by the devil and also accused Alison's grandmother of practising witchcraft, branding her an agent of the devil. This was no longer a single case of a cursed peddler. Nowell was now leading a major witch hunt.
They were then sent straight to the city of Lancaster and thrown into Lancaster City Castle Jail. The most important part of the Pendle Witch Trials of 1612 is what we call the Good Friday meeting at Malkin Tower. This is where the so-called witches all gathered.
That quickly got escalated out of all proportion into the devil had been invited and all sorts of satanic dances were taking place. And I think it's impossible now to know what did or what didn't happen.
The people that were successfully arrested that day would be James Device, Elizabeth Device, and by far the most famous of all the Pendle witches, a rather brave lady called Alice Nutter. They were thrown into a deep, deep dungeon in Lancaster City Castle called the Well Tower, and they were in complete darkness for 5 very long months.
And Mum's dying in here, you heartless beggars! How can you just walk by like that and let her die?
Chained to the floor, the conditions in there would be absolutely horrific. So horrific, it was in fact going to claim old Mother Demdike's life.
When the Device family was in prison, one of the daughters, called Janet, who was then 9 years old, nobody knows exactly where she was either at the time or afterwards. Her movements are very uncertain.
Her position between the arrest of her relatives and the trial is simply unknown. We don't know what she's up to, we don't think we know where she is, we don't know to whom she's speaking, or vice versa.
I can imagine that if you were illiterate, you were a beggar, you were wearing very ragged clothes, with absolutely no education whatsoever, to get taken into a courtroom would be absolutely terrifying. There would be the judge and all the other officials of the court who would treat you like absolute dirt, and you would be told to stand there and do this and do that, and you would have no idea what was going on. I think you would be absolutely terrified, and with justification, because these people were not stupid, and they certainly knew that they stood a very good chance of being found guilty and of being executed.
The first person brought up from the cells to go in trial was indeed Anne Whittle. She'd seen light for the first time inside 4.5 months, and she was in a terrible state of health.
This is the arraignment and trial of one Anne Whittle of the Forest of Pendle in the county of Lancaster. You will take the stand.
Anne Whittle was found guilty of the murder of 5 people. She was found guilty of making these clay effigies, of crumbling the clay effigies, and people were dying, not necessarily straight away, but certainly after they'd seen her.
Anne Whittle, this court finds you guilty of the murder of Robert Nutter, and finds that you maintain a black allegiance with the devil, and have performed obscene acts.
Oh God, no! Oh, please forgive me.
You shall be removed from the court to await your sentencing.
Don't hurt me, don't hurt me.
The next person to go on trial is Elizabeth Device. She's the middle generation. She is the daughter of Demdike, one of the 2 old matriarchs who are the chief suspects as being the organisers of witchcraft in the Pendle area.
Elizabeth Device, you stand before us here charged with the murder of John and James Robinson of Barley by use of witchcraft. What say you to these charges?
Not guilty, my lord.
Remember, witch, you are bound by law to tell the truth.
I am no witch.
And yet I noted your absence from Mass this last Good Friday, a day when all those loyal Protestants among you would know to show face at church. Or perhaps you are otherwise engaged binding yourself to the devil's service.
Sir, I am a good woman. I've never been bound to the devil.
Then how is it we came to find you conjuring spirits at Malkin Tower?
I have no knowledge of this, sir.
Was there a casting of spells?
There was no casting of spells.
Did you call upon the devil?
I never call upon the devil.
And at this meeting, did you not attempt to put a curse of Mr. McCovell, the governor of Lancaster Castle, in a bitter attempt to free your fellow convicted witches?
I have never harmed no one.
My lord, may I call upon my first witness to the court?
Janet.
Child, could you tell the court your name?
My name is Janet, sir.
Children at that period of time were used as witnesses. They were thought to be completely innocent of society's evils, really.
They probably didn't realise that they were condemning their own family to death. And in court, Janet's mother tried to convey to her the significance of what she was doing. But I can imagine that poor Janet, the child, must have been absolutely terrified, not knowing what was right or what was wrong, and just trying to keep everybody happy and do what she thought would be the best way of getting herself out of trouble.
And how do you know the woman stood here?
She is my mother.
And do you know why she has stood here today, Janet?
Because my mother is a witch, and that I know to be true.
No, Janet, you know I am not.
Janet, I'd like you to tell the court how you know your mother to be a witch.
Give up your stories. You bring me to harm.
She has. I've seen her.
Sirs, she knows I am no real witch. Janet!
Sir, I asked my mother to be taken away before I will speak.
Very well, we shall have Elizabeth Device removed from the court until the child has given her evidence.
How can you do this to me? Please, Janet, listen to me. Let go of my hand. Janet, help me help your mother.
A 9-year-old girl testifying against her mother, Jeanette. Well, you imagine coming from a stone cottage where you'd have no socks, no shoes, where you'd be living on very, very basic food, where conditions would be very squalid and horrible, and then finding yourself in a lovely wooden panelled bedroom with a nice warm fire, 3 meals a day, nice clothes to wear. She'd be saying, this is marvellous. I believe in this case that Roger Noel, the magistrate, to use a modern term, did groom young Jeanette and used her to his advantage. And he knew if he could incriminate all these people, he would make a name for himself and do very, very well.
I know my mother to be a witch. I've seen her spirit in the likeness of a brown dog which she called Bull. The dog would ask, what would she have him do? She answered, she would have him help her to kill.
Bless you, child. I would now like you to tell the court what you saw on Good Friday last.
On Good Friday, about 20 people came to our house. My mother told me that they were all witches. They all ate the mutton which my brother stole and killed. Then they wanted to name my sister Alison's spirit. They used the big pot and it filled with a black bubbling liquid. Then they poured in powder and teeth and skulls, which she said they stole. They wanted to free my grandmother and my sister. They were going to kill the jailer and blow up the castle.
Elizabeth Device would have been absolutely heartbroken by what had happened. She'd seen her own daughter give evidence against her. I think that the stuffing had been kicked out of her, really, and she accepted the fate with a lot of bravery, I think, really.
Elizabeth Device, you are accused of performing and employing damnable acts in your witchcraft. How do you plead?
Guilty.
The court has heard ample evidence of a meeting at Malkin Tower on Good Friday. How do you plead?
Guilty.
Before you are escorted from the court, Miss Device, I would like to offer you the opportunity to purge yourself of further guilt by giving us the names of those others you know to have been marked by the devil. Others, perhaps members of your family, who will be taking the stand later.
James Device, when he was brought up from the cells, like everyone else, he saw daylight for the very, very first time. He looked in a terrible, terrible state. He was so limp, he had to be dragged into the court. He was lapsing in and out of consciousness. He certainly looked in a very, very bad state of health.
This is the arraignment and trial of James Device.
Have you seen your brother use such devilish practices?
I heard him once say charm. He told me it would cure one bewitched.
Janet, please.
The first person to go on trial on the second day was Alice Nutter, which is really odd because she is wealthy, has servants, has land. Almost never do you find a gentlewoman accused of witchcraft in early modern Europe.
Mrs. Alice Nutter, you are under arrest with charges of murder by joint witchcraft of a certain Henry Mitten brought against you. What say you to these charges?
Not guilty, sir.
Miss Nutter, I must admit I am somewhat baffled to find you caught up in these dark goings-on. I must report I have only heard good of your character up until now.
May I remind the court the devil is no respecter of character. He may mark anyone for his own.
There be no mark upon my soul. I will tell this court that.
But given the evidence supplied by the device children, it is very certain you were an attendee of the Grand Coven at Malkin Tower that Good Friday.
I am innocent! I will not have my name blackened in this village and be used as a pawn to your own ends.
And what is it, do you think Mr. Noel has to gain by your indictment?
This man is killing me for my land, sir. Everybody knows this to be true.
She is merely throwing dust into your eyes to screen you from the true purpose of this trial.
Innocent, a witch, I'm innocent.
A witch will never confess. Her allegiance with the devil runs too deep for that. We must look to the Jennet child for the truth.
It does concern me how much of these trials is dependent on the evidence of a child.
May I suggest we
will make a trial of the girl's evidence and the accusations of Miss Nutter's participation in this great meeting.
It's interesting that the judges at the trial didn't simply accept Jennet's testimony. They tried what's one of the first examples in human history of an identity parade.
May the court see Jennet device. I would like you to tell the court who before you it was that you saw at Malkin Tower that Good Friday. No one else is to gesture or utter until I am completely satisfied.
You were there on Good Friday. You had on the pretty dress. You were sitting right by me.
God.
They also gave her a false name, and Jennet immediately replied she'd never heard of it. And it's this that tips the balance of credulity among the judges.
And at this meeting, did you see a Joanna Style?
No, sir. I never heard of her.
Miss Nutter claims that you have been lying to the court, that you are leading us with stories. If this be true, I urge you to confess now. A quick confession will serve a lighter punishment. Is there any truth in this?
No, sir. I saw her at my mother's house.
She lies! Oh, you are fools if you believe in such trickery.
What more can you ask of us? We have exhausted our powers.
Nobody is quite sure why Alice Nutter got involved in the trials, but she was a Roman Catholic, and Roger Noel hated Catholics. So to sweep up a Catholic, especially a wealthy Catholic, as part of his drive was a double score. The contrast between Alice Nutter and Alison Device is striking and poignant. Alice Nutter, we know nothing about her as a person, but she'd have been well-educated, moneyed, socially self-confident. And Alison Device, by contrast, an impoverished young woman, a girl, from the wrong end of society, confused, terrified, vulnerable.
Behold, above all the rest, this lamentable spectacle of a poor distressed pedlar. How miserably he was tormented, and such punishment endured for a small offence by the wicked and damnable practice of this odious witch.
No, sir, I never meant...
She feloniously had practised her wicked and devilish arts in one John Law, a petty chapman, and had him lame so his body wasted and consumed.
Please, I beg you, hear my plea. I pray you, hear me.
If the defendant would like to step forward, then let us proceed.
I am guilty. A witch. I see that now. I pray you forgive me, sir. I never meant no harm by it. I have rid myself of the devil, though, turned him away. I beg you forgive me, sir. I openly declare myself.
Marks of the devil are as definite as stone. Do you see any way, child, of expelling the spirits you did lay upon him?
I don't know. I don't think... I'm sorry, sir, I don't know how. The only person who would have such knowledge was my grandmother, Demdike. Only she could take away his torment.
I feel very sorry for Alison Device. I see her as a rather mixed up, poor little girl who probably did curse a peddler for brushing her aside and was then horrified to see that her curse appeared to work.
From our modern sensibilities, and even for some at the time, the idea of people being put through the stress and anxiety of an accusation of witchcraft and put on trial and maybe even executed for a crime that in a sense we know didn't exist is a terrible thing. It's a terrible thing.
There is no man alive more unwilling than myself to pronounce this woeful and heavy judgment against you. I would to God that this cup might pass from me, but since it is otherwise, there must be a judgment. It only remains for me to pronounce this judgment, which is, by the King's authority, that you will be taken hence to the place of your incarceration, and thence to the place of your execution, where your bodies shall be hanged until they are dead, and God have mercy on your soul.
So